If your partner keeps pulling away, calling them avoidant might help explain their behavior, but it could also keep you waiting for a relationship they don't actually want. Or it could cause you to walk away from a relationship that isn't trying to end at all, but is showing you where something needs to be understood, communicated, or changed. In this video, I'll give you 5 questions that help separate the two. So before you diagnose the person, consider the questions which help answer what is probably behind your concern, which is, does this person actually want and have the capacity to create the relationship I want with me? Although we're going to get very practical, I want to establish the premise from which I approach clarity. I work from the perspective that the outside world functions as a mirror. Everything we encounter gives us information about the relationship we're having with ourselves. That doesn't mean another person's behavior isn't real. It doesn't mean you should tolerate behavior that hurts you. And it certainly doesn't mean every relationship should continue. It means that whatever is happening contains information. And if we can stop reacting long enough to investigate that information, we get our power back. Instead of needing another person to change before we can find clarity, we can ask, what is this situation actually showing me? So let's begin. First checklist question. What do I actually know without interpreting it? This is where so many relationship problems begin. Something happens, we feel something, we interpret what happened. Then, without noticing, we begin treating our interpretation as evidence. A relatively small event can become a mountain, and before long we can find ourselves living inside a story that may bear very little resemblance to what the other person is actually experiencing. So ask, has this person actually given me evidence, verbally, in writing, or consistently through their behavior, that confirms they're avoiding me? And more importantly, have they given me evidence that they're avoiding me because they don't want this relationship? Those are not the same thing. If they haven't, then at this stage you're working with assumptions. The feeling may be completely real. You may genuinely feel rejected, unimportant, angry, unsafe. But the feeling isn't necessarily evidence that your explanation for it is correct. So rather than analysing the entire relationship, find a specific occasion when you felt the avoidance. Then investigate that. What actually happened? What did you feel? What did you assume? What do you know? And what information is still missing? Then open the conversation. There's something very important here if you genuinely want the truth from another person. They have to feel free and safe enough to tell you the truth. That means 2 things. First, take responsibility for your feelings. Approach the conversation as though you have something you're struggling to understand. And the other person may have information that can help you understand it. That's a very different energy from, you've done something wrong and now I want you to explain yourself. And you need to embody that before you speak, because people often sense whether they're walking into curiosity or a courtroom before the first real question has even been asked. Second, help them understand what's in the conversation for them. Honesty needs to feel attractive. Imagine saying something like, "Hi John, I've been struggling with some feelings lately and I'd really appreciate your help understanding what's happening. I've been feeling as though you're avoiding me or pulling away from our relationship and it doesn't feel good. But I also realise I may have interpreted you unfairly, and if I have, you don't deserve that." To give you a specific example, I've sent a few messages asking if you'd like to meet, and I haven't received a response. I don't want to pressure you into a relationship or connection that isn't what you want. If you'd rather be connecting differently, or even with other people, I'd genuinely rather understand that. I'd like to know how this feels from your side so I can understand you and what you need. I prefer honesty, even when the answer might initially be uncomfortable. What matters to me is that we're both free to be honest about what we want. Have I misread what's happening? Then sit with those words yourself. Imagine receiving them. Ask, would I feel safe answering this honestly? Would I feel free? Or would I suspect there's only one answer I'm actually allowed to give? That's important. If you imagine the other person's truthful answer and immediately feel yourself becoming angry, defensive, or frightened, there's another piece of information. Something else may need to be included in the conversation. Whether you have that conversation face-to-face or in writing depends partly on how well you communicate when you're emotionally activated. If you know that a difficult conversation will have you interrupting, fighting for control, defending, or forgetting what you actually wanted to ask, writing may help you communicate more clearly. The goal isn't to win, the goal is to discover what's true. So question 1 is about clearing the fog. What do I actually know? What information is missing? And have I created enough freedom in the conversation for the truth to emerge? Second checklist question. Has my partner ever clearly told me what they want and how they naturally like to connect? This matters enormously because if they haven't, you may be evaluating their behaviour entirely through the lens of how you believe a relationship should work. How often should somebody text? How much time should couples spend together? How quickly should somebody respond? How much affection should they show? How much independence is healthy? You may have very clear answers, but are they your partner's answers too? Perhaps you experience frequent messaging as connection. They experience it as pressure. Perhaps they experience independence as trust. You experience it as distance. Neither automatically tells us that somebody is avoidant. It tells us that two people may have different ways of experiencing connection. Until those differences have been communicated, you don't actually know what you're dealing with. Third checklist question. Even if I establish that they are avoiding closeness, has there been enough genuine movement in this relationship to make continuing worthwhile? This question is deeply personal for me. My very happy 25-year relationship began in exactly this territory. Had I acted purely on my emotions at the beginning, I would probably have ended it. Instead, investigating what looked like avoidance opened an enormous can of worms, and ultimately gave me some of the greatest wisdom and joy of my life. Here's what happened. I wasn't even looking for a relationship. I was fiercely independent, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I didn't really believe there was somebody who would match the experiences that mattered to me. This was long before I understood the outer mirror in the way I use it today. We were living in different countries, so we certainly didn't have the kind of committed relationship I eventually wanted. But something in me kept saying, this is worth investigating. One day we were talking on the phone, and I suddenly sensed something was off, so I asked the frightening question, are you seeing someone else? The answer felt devastating. Yes, kind of. Now I had information, but even that information didn't tell me the whole story. I knew he wasn't fully committing to me. I knew he'd started seeing someone else. And then I discovered something that appeared considerably worse. He'd actually moved into her apartment. At that point, I had a choice. I could become furious, accuse him of cheating, dishonesty, disrespect. I could allow every emotion that had been triggered to determine my next move. Or I could calm myself enough to investigate the facts. Fortunately, investigation is something I'm very good at. So I started testing what was actually happening. What did he want? What mattered to him? Was there enough evidence here to justify continuing the dialogue? And I want you to understand just how confronting this situation was. At one point, he actually said the words, "She is my dream woman. She ticks all my boxes." How do you come back from that? You don't. You investigate it. If she's your dream woman and she ticks all your boxes, why are you still contacting me? Wouldn't it make more sense for us to leave this here so you can get on with your life with her in peace? And this part mattered. I asked from as neutral an emotional state as I could because I wanted the truth more than I wanted a particular answer. There was a very long silence, and that silence gave me enough information to continue asking questions. Not indefinitely, not because I was determined to win him, because there was still movement. There was still something here that neither of us had understood. Fast forward 4 months. It took that long and a great deal of dialogue for him to establish what he actually wanted and what mattered to him. He ended that relationship and continued the journey with me. It then took another 6 months before I had the commitment I needed to move to Denmark and live with him. That was 25 years ago. We've been living and working together ever since, and both of our lives have thrived as we've learned to use the relationship to show us where we can help ourselves and each other experience more enjoyment. Occasionally we still laugh about, "She's my dream woman," Not to ridicule him, not because what he felt at the time wasn't real, but because it's such a wonderful example of the difference between a feeling, an opinion, and something that ultimately holds water. Had I treated one statement made at one moment in time as the complete truth of our future, I would have made a very different decision. But there's an equally important lesson here. Investigation should not become an excuse for indefinite waiting. I continued because there was movement, there was dialogue, there was evidence. If I'd spent those months being repeatedly shut out with no willingness from him to investigate what was happening, that would also have been information. So ask, is there enough genuine movement here to make this worth continuing for me? Fourth checklist question. Am I in relationship with who this person is demonstrating themselves to be today, or with who I believe they could become? People change, relationships change, behavior changes. My own story demonstrates that. So I would never tell you that somebody's behavior today proves they'll behave that way forever. But there's another trap here. Potential is not evidence. Movement is evidence. If you believe the avoidance can change, ask yourself, where's the evidence? Have they demonstrated self-awareness? Have they engaged in difficult conversations? Have they acknowledged what's happening? Have they changed behavior before? Are both of you participating in creating something different? Or are you doing all the investigating, all the understanding, all the forgiving, all the waiting, while imagining the person they might eventually become? That's a very different situation. And if the same behavior has happened repeatedly, you've talked about it repeatedly, both people had genuine freedom to tell the truth, and nothing changes, that's information too. At some point, we have to ask, am I still investigating because something genuinely remains unclear, or because I don't want to accept the answer I'm already being given? That's your call. Fifth checklist question. If nothing changed for the next 12 months, would I choose the relationship I have today? This is such a powerful question because it allows information to float to the surface that you may not even realize is there. Don't answer quickly, sit with it. If nothing changed, not their communication, not their availability, not their affection, not their willingness to commit, not their behavior, would I knowingly choose this relationship for another 12 months? Now watch what comes up. You may discover that avoidance isn't actually the main problem. You might suddenly think, actually, the avoidance irritates me, but there are several other things bothering me far more. Brilliant. Now we're getting somewhere. Perhaps the avoidance was simply the final trigger that brought another unresolved issue to the surface. Maybe you suddenly remember occasions when they were dishonest, disloyal, dismissive, or hurt you deeply, and you never actually found peace with what happened. The current avoidance may simply be your body's next attempt to bring something unresolved to your attention. Or something completely different may emerge. Perhaps you're the one avoiding. Perhaps the relationship is moving dangerously close to a level of intimacy that frightens you, and focusing entirely on their avoidance gives you permission not to examine your own. That's why I don't want you to rush these questions. Give them space. Because the answer that initially seems obvious may not be the real answer at all. The premise I continually return to is this: the relationship is giving you information. That doesn't mean every relationship should continue. A relationship can absolutely be wrong for you to continue, while still being extraordinarily valuable in showing you something about yourself. The outer mirror isn't telling you to stay, and it isn't telling you to leave. It's asking you to see. Then you decide. So what's the takeaway? Before deciding that your partner is avoidant, or that avoidance means they don't want you, walk yourself honestly through these 5 questions. What do I actually know without interpreting it? Has my partner clearly communicated what they want and how they naturally connect? Even if closeness is difficult for them, is there enough genuine movement to make continuing worthwhile? Am I relating to who they are demonstrating themselves to be, or to their potential? And, if absolutely nothing changed for 12 months, would I knowingly choose what I have today? Do your best to calm your emotional state enough to seek facts. Not because your feelings are wrong, your feelings are valuable information, but they are not necessarily an accurate explanation of another person's behavior. And if, after clearing up the facts, you conclude that this relationship isn't for you, you haven't failed. You've gained incredibly valuable information about what matters to you, what you want, what you're willing to accept, and how you need to communicate those things in your relationships. One final point. Whatever you believe is right and reasonable for you, make sure you're willing to offer the same freedom to the other person. If you want to feel safe enough to speak your most intimate feelings, they need that safety too. If you want freedom to be yourself, they need freedom to be themselves. So when your partner speaks, notice what's happening inside you. Are you listening? Or are you bracing, preparing your defense, getting ready to correct them, control the outcome, attack their answer? Because we cannot genuinely ask another human being for the truth while silently communicating that only one version of the truth will be accepted. Create the freedom you want to experience. Ask the questions, listen to the answers, watch the behavior, look for movement, and then make your decision from what is actually happening, rather than from the label you've placed upon it, because ultimately the most useful question may not be, "Is my partner avoidant?" It may be, "Now that I've looked at what's actually here, is this the relationship I consciously choose?"